Virginia Held is an American philosopher born in 1929. She is still alive. She is a distinguished professor at the City University of New York, now retired. You can actually find some of her lectures on YouTube. She's one of the major advocates of the ethics of care. She criticizes Aristotle, Kant, and Mill, whom she classifies as the dominant moral theorists, and tries to come up with an alternative to all of them. And she calls this alternative the ethics of care. We'll talk, of course, a lot more about what this is. The ethics of care is one of the types of feminist ethics. At least it came out of the feminist movement, although it's taken on a life of its own and has indeed become one of the mainstream ethical theories of our day. There are other types of ethical theories that are defended by other feminist authors, so it's not the only feminist ethics. The idea of feminism, if you're not really familiar with it, is very basically the opposite of masculinism. Masculinism is the theory, or all the theories, that put men and the experience of men at the center of our attention, and that tend to ignore the experience of women. And there are a few things that masculinist theories have in common. One is an overemphasis on reason and an underemphasis on emotion. Another is an overemphasis on political power and the public sphere, what is now called the marketplace, and an underemphasis on the private sphere. So the public sphere that masculinist philosophies talk about is characterized by competition, whereas feminism places the experience of women at the center as a corrective to masculinism. Now, of course, the ideal would be that the human being would be at the center of ethical theory without emphasizing male or female, taking both genders' experiences and insights seriously and taking them into account equally. But Held thinks that ethical theory has gone way too far in a masculinist direction, so that at this point in history we need a corrective of emphasizing women's experience, because that's precisely what's missing from ethical theory. But at the same time, Held wants to criticize the traditional gender roles that are assigned to women to play. Now, what the ethics of care emphasizes is the relationship of caring for another person who is vulnerable. The leading example is the mother who cares for a child. And of course, the child is dependent temporarily on her for life. It's an unequal relationship, whereas traditional ethical theories tend to focus on equal and public relationships of independent persons, and thereby ignore the phenomenon of care, which is an unequal private relationship that happens at home. It's not integrated into the market. And in that relationship of care, we are not independent persons, but dependent and interdependent ones. And we don't have competitive relationships there, but more nurturing, collaborative relationships. And these relationships of care are not limited, of course, to the mother-child relationship or the parent-child relationship. We have a similar relationship of care when we talk about the relationship with the elderly, elder care, caring for the disabled, the teacher-student relationship, the obligation of care that a police officer has towards someone who is injured on the ground. So Held's question is what an ethics of care would look like. What an ethics would look like that was based on relationships of caring, and the qualities that they have. What kind of ethics would that offer us in contrast to the traditional ethical theories that she finds defective? And Held wants to strive for a certain kind of universality, a different one from, let's say, the universality of Kant, which Held wants to strongly criticize. But Held wants to say the phenomenon of caring, the experience of caring and being cared for, is one that everyone shares. It's not restricted to women, it's not restricted to mothers. And so the ethics of care depends upon something universal in that sense, a universal phenomenon of caring and being cared for. Now, when Held is criticizing other philosophers as being masculinist, she mainly has Kant and Mill in mind. She has more affection for Aristotle's virtue ethics. She has more in common with his philosophy, but she still wants to argue that the ethics of care is something distinct from virtue ethics. And of course, we know that Aristotle is writing his ethics out of a cultural context that is sexist, racist, homophobic, xenophobic, classist, and so forth. So Held will, of course, want to distance herself, at least from those aspects of Aristotle's philosophy.